Thank you. Figured I'd expand it a little bit. I had done a presentation at the JAF Nation user conference this past year. Did anybody attend that or watch that video? Okay. I also did a webinar just a few months after that on PPPC as well. Did anybody attend that? There was one for Australia. Okay. So I apologize to everyone who raised their hands. You will see some overlap. I apologize, but I did try to change it up a little bit, expand, and also with some of the new changes that Apple's been doing around extensions and notarization. So we'll talk in a little bit more detail about those things. As he said, my name is Mike Paul. I'm a product manager at JAF. Might have caught that yesterday during my thing, but yeah. I work as more of the technical back-end product manager, mostly focusing on database, web app, binary, and just kind of functionality changes behind that. But in my different time, I've helped and work with JAF's deployment and management of our settings around the PPPC stuff. So I've kind of became our de facto guy who talks about that. So what we're going to get into, and not super accurate agenda because I've been tweaking the slides and everything else up until about 5 minutes ago. So we'll play it by ear, but we're going to talk about the new introductions from Apple, kind of impact what it means to you and your end users, identifying impacted applications, methods for management, and then some troubleshooting. Acronyms, we've got lots of them. The idea where a lot of the different security and other stuff didn't necessarily start with GDPR, but that was a good kick in the butt to get everyone to kind of start looking and talking more publicly about how do we protect end users' data and all the things around there, and essentially enabling end users to be aware of what is trying to access and what things are trying to do. Other terms and things used, there's the transparent consent and control, TCC. Since we are stubborn, we made our own privacy preference policy control, PPPC, or 3PCO, or dyslexic protocol droid. There's KEXT, which is kernel extensions, and then the new thing coming out is system extensions. And I heard another acronym for that just did not sound appropriate to say, so I bleeped that out up there. And then notarization, which there's not an abbreviation for, but I figured I'd translate it for you if you weren't sure what I was talking about. Notarization. So, to kind of run through how we got to here, a little history on where things came. PPPC was really introduced in 10.14, and JAF Pro 10.71 started adding stuff, and we really got in there in 10.9. Coming soon, Apple has publicly announced the different things that they are extending the breadth of their user data protections, more things around the privacy preferences. And then JAF Pro 10.15, getting very Inception-ish here, with our support, we will extend our support for the new user data protections as well, both in the GUI and in our PPPC utility. So it just keeps changing, it keeps adding, and we will keep chasing at JAF as much as this keeps going. Extensions have been around even longer. Started back in 10.9 when they were just saying, hey, you should sign it. And then around 10.10, they started requiring that they actually are signed. 10.13 added some interesting changes around the secure kernel extension loading, and in particular, it was the big change when they started adding user-approved things around for user-approved MDM, where essentially end users would have to approve the loading of those things if they were not whitelisted. JAF Pro added support for whitelisting those approved kernel extensions, or it actually would be unapproved kernel extensions, but we are whitelisting it so they are approved. And then macOS 10.14.5, which just recently came out, is actually requiring new kernel extensions to be notarized and signed. So the notarization is a new addition to that. They have also said, and out there in the public documentation for coming up soon, any third-party kernel extensions it's actually going to require the system to reboot for them to load. So that is definitely a functionality change that we're going to have to see there coming forward. And they've also introduced what are called system extensions. So the system extensions is an interesting new addition where basically they're moving it away from the thing that can actually touch the kernel, which apparently has a lot of power on the system, moving it to load and run in the user environment. So the system extensions is definitely the future of things to go, and hopefully we can get the app developers to follow along and change their stuff. which is a move in the right direction, if you ask me, moving more things away from that, places in the OS where they can get access to things that they don't need. And then again, JAF Pro will support the whitelisting of the system extensions via the same method as the kernel extensions. Thankfully, it's not a big difference of how these things are actually set up and deployed. It's just kind of where they are, and it's up to the actual extension of what they touch. Notarization has been around, again, not as long. First started introducing app notarization 10.14, and then JAF Pro 10.11, we notarized our JAF management framework, which is our binary, our notification stuff, and our self-service. In 10.12 from JAF Pro, we notarized Composer, Admin, Remote, and Recon. We did not notarize imaging because I think the term is imaging is dead, and also really doesn't work on the newer version of OS, so you shouldn't be running imaging on 10.15, so we're not notarizing it for 10.15. But coming soon, macOS is going to require the notarization of all new software and kernel extensions. And then we are adding the functionality for allowing whitelist of non-notarized apps as well. And we'll kind of dig into how you actually do that. But first, we'll kind of run through and dig a little deeper into each of those different topics, the PPPC, the KEXT, and the notarization. So PPPC, it's fun. It's super easy to grasp, like definitely not causing any issues or confusion out there in the community. Thankfully, there is a wonderful community out there on the Mac Admin Slack and through a bunch of blogs of amazing admins out there. So all the stuff I'm going to be sharing here is stuff that I've gained from the different amazingly intelligent people out there. So basically, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. They might not be giants, but I'm short, so whatever. They're bigger. But I've learned a lot from them, and we're going to dig into some of those great things that they've shared, and I'll try to compile it and have links for all the different stuff. And then amazingly today, I found my mascot for PPPC as well. Definitely going to have to get me one of those shirts. So we'll kind of dig into where this PPPC stuff is going and what it actually means. So what's it mean to our end users? So all of these PPPC stuff around the user control means that the users are actually going to have to give a choice of whether they want to approve an application gets access to something. Now, that's something we'll talk about a little bit more. And the users can choose to either disable or block the needed applications. It also means they're going to be prompted a lot, which obviously can go into things that people call user fatigue or prompt fatigue, where they don't actually know what's going on. Thankfully, with different things via MDM, you have the ability to whitelist those things that you want to be approved in your environment, those things that you need. And then, obviously, you don't have to approve everything. If end users are installing their own things, like, let them deal with it. Let them understand that it's their choice for those different things. But you, as an admin, can have the choice of what you want to whitelist for your environment, for your needed stuff. So now we'll actually dig in and do a live demo on Catalina to show you how these things actually work. No, sorry, it's still in beta. We're not actually going to get into Catalina. But I do have a nice old OS there with an awesome desktop picture, almost as cool as macOS's new Catalina one. But we will talk about what is publicly talked about and shared so far in documentation around what is available and coming with Catalina. So admin impact. It means you have to talk to your end users. And if you're not already talking to your end users about these changes, I don't really get why you wouldn't be, but you should be. You should be communicating a lot with end users and letting them know these things are for them. This is helping them have control over their environment. And then you as an admin, unfortunately, it means a lot of testing. You're the only one who knows what applications you're deploying in your environment. And through testing, you're the ones who's going to have to know what applications are causing these prompts. Understanding how to read the logs, which are unfortunately not that intuitive. Understanding parent process and then the chain of things where if I have, say, a launch daemon that's calling a script that's communicating to something else, and understanding that chain of that communication and figuring out, well, yes, terminal called this script, and it is the script that's calling this thing that's protected, but terminal would be my parent process because it's the one that started it. So understanding that chain of process there can be confusing, but thankfully there's a lot of good information out there. Understanding how to gather the required information needed to actually whitelist these things, and then understanding what these things are trying to actually target. Not always the most intuitive. Thankfully, newer changes in Xcode and everything else are forcing the app developers to state more clearly what they're trying to access, but it's still not always there. So sometimes it takes a little digging to figure it out. So thankfully, in JAF Pro, I believe this should start going. The demo, see if I click the button again. There it goes. So in JAF Pro, we added the ability to automatically whitelist the JAF framework. So we are whitelisting the JAF binary, JAF agent, and the JAF.app to actually communicate with system policy all files. So it covers all of the different things under system policy. And we'll dig into that a little bit more, what that means and how that is kind of an overarching thing. If you were a non-approved UA-MDM, we're not able to do this. Thankfully, self-service will tell you how to do it. Once you are user approved, which if you were done through automated device enrollment or DEP, that would actually happen automatically. Then this profile goes out. We have logic built in that says, all right, if it is a user approved computer and it is of a supported OS, it will automatically go out. So if you are upgrading from 10.12 to 10.13 or to 10.14 or the 10.15 coming up, we'll be able to tell within the built-in functionality in the back end what that means. We also wrote a very verbose KB. That's kind of my shtick. I'm way too verbose. My flag's always stuck on. So you can see which KBs I'm involved in because they tend to go too much into things. But we have a KB running through and kind of showing you where all this stuff is. There's a lot of other information in here, and I have links to kind of show how that goes. So now I have that out there, but say I want to push out other profiles as well. I'm going to want to, I can use the built-in logic that we already have we're deploying our profile automatically based off of some things you don't have access to, like the OS that we're able to check at login. So for all other profile deployments for PPPC, you can actually use the existence of our profile that we pushed out. So that way your profiles can go out at that same right away immediate moment at a time of upgrade on that first login we can have out there. It actually would go out faster than any other smart group logic you could apply. We have just some things in the back end that's like, all right, it is a supported OS, you're in the scope, it goes. So leveraging the work we did is kind of a good way to get those profiles to go out quick and right away. So cool, I have my framework, my JAF stuff is whitelisted, I have a smart group ready to build to be able to push out my other profiles. But how do I build my other profiles? What do I actually need? Well, there's three main things you need to do for a PPPC profile. You need to figure out its identifier, which is either a bundle ID or the path, for a bundle ID for apps or a path for a binary executable. You need the code signature, which is essentially it returns like the identification of the developer who signed it. It's just something unique to their developer certificate. And then you have to figure out what that application is trying to access. So we have some different ways to actually gather that. We can run the code sign command manually and show you how to do that. There is an amazing Python script out there called TCC profile made by Carl Ashley. There is Profile Creator, another amazing tool made by Eric Bergeland. And then there's the code signature gatherer script that I have available up on the JAF GitHub. And then there's links to all these things at the end, so don't worry too much about that. And then we have the PPPC utility, which is also available on our GitHub that was made by one of our JAF developers, but it is an open source tool. So we have a lot of ways to gather these different things. But what am I actually whitelisting to? What am I trying to give this access to? These are the privacy service dictionary keys that were released with 10.14. A bunch of different things, say contacts, calendars, reminders, and then we get into more complicated things like camera, microphone, system policy all files, system policy admin files, and the Apple events. Now, there's a couple asterisks with those things. Camera and microphone, you can't whitelist. So say you have a video conferencing software that you're pushing out, you cannot actually whitelist that camera and microphone are automatically turned on and allowed for that application. That is one of the few events that we can't say it automatically works for, because those things could have invasive or security things for those end users. So those are regardless going to have to be up to an end user choice. Another note, system policy all files is pretty much like a catch-all. Try to avoid using that when all possible. Figure out what specifically it needs, and then whitelist for that. And then there's Apple events, and that one's different because Apple events isn't actually the target. Apple events is the middleman. So say I need to allow JAF helper to communicate with Finder to pop up a message or something like that, or I need to allow something, other applications to communicate with each other. I can actually whitelist the permissions between that using the Apple events. And we'll kind of dig into that in a little bit. There's new ones coming out from Apple. Thankfully, they just keep popping up more protected things. So we have a bunch of different things around there. Some of these are really neat around the idea of protecting around screen capture and key input and other things that could be very malicious in their intent. But we have other things like protecting the desktop documents, downloads, network volumes, which is an interesting one to be aware of if you are mounting distribution points via different methods. Are definitely new things that are actually kind of coming out there of protecting the communication to that. So we got some new things, more values to actually be aware of and do that. But it also means we're going to get a lot more prompts, like a lot more prompts. So how do I gather the code signature? So I have a couple different ways that I can do that. And the live demo doesn't show on my screen, so I actually have to see behind me what is going on. So here I'm going to actually run the code signature binary to actually find it. So I do code sign -dr space dash and then path to the application. It'll actually return a few different things here for it. First one I get, bundle ID. So that is one of the main things I need. That is the identifier because it's an app. The other thing I get is the code signature, and it is actually everything after the equal sign and the greater than symbol. So all of that is my code signature. So I can do this for each of my apps. It's kind of tedious. I got my different ways. I can go in to a profile here and actually type in that information, be neurotic and set my categories because it's good to organize. I go down to the privacy preference policy control, which thankfully was not built into the security and privacy payload as well. Separating that stuff out. And then I put in this different information. So cool, grab the couple of values I need. All right, so I got my identifier, I got my code requirement is a bundle ID because it is an application. And then the next thing I need to do is I need to figure out what I'm actually communicating with. So what does iTerm need? Well, unfortunately, I can't figure that out until I launch the application. And some applications are a little fickle and might actually take launching it multiple times or doing different things or just waiting for a while before you get that prompt. So here I am waiting awkwardly. And then finally it says, hey, it needs access to accessibility. Okay, so this is what the end user would see. And they could say deny or open system preferences and go whitelist it itself. But if iTerm is an application that you need in your environment and you don't want your end users to have to deal with this, I can actually say, cool, I want to allow this to talk to accessibility. And now I have a profile that will whitelist this communication. That was a lot of work. It was copying and pasting. It was less than desirable methods. Thankfully, there are easier methods, like the PPPC utility. So say I launch PPPC, I drag the application in, it pulls out the bundle ID, it pulls out the code signature. Thankfully, now I know what thing it actually needs access to, which is the accessibility. I click Allow, and I have a couple options. I can either save this as a config profile and upload it to any different MDM, or if you're using JAF Pro, we actually have an option to upload directly to a JAF Pro server. Give it a name. I can test my connection. Give it a description, optional, but again, details. It's good to help people out. Check connection. Yep, it worked. Cool. Upload. And then if I go back to my JAF Pro server, I will actually see that there as well. And wonderful. There is my new one. It's pre-built, has all the different stuff ready to go. I just need to specify where it's going to. Thankfully, I actually already built a smart group as my target for this. So again, I can go, I search for my computer group that I had built in the first recorded video, select it, and then immediately, if I go back and actually check my computer, yep, actually already sent. Go to profiles and I can verify it's already there. So using some of that built-in logic for the scope and everything else can just help expedite this process so there's less work for you later. Cool. So how do I actually identify the impacted apps? I can wait till my end users tell me. Probably not the most proactive way to do with it. I can manually launch all the applications in my environment, watch all the logs, and look for a specific value in there to kind of grep or pull out the values for this subsystem for com.apple.tcc. I can read the TCC database to see what my end users had previously chose. And I can look at entitlements. Now, entitlements are super cool, and thankfully it's something that is coming more and more in the most, not the most recent because they've updated it since, but in a very recent version of Xcode, if you are an app developer and your application needs to access something else, you actually have to predefine your entitlements. You have to say, yes, my application does need to talk to this other thing. So the entitlements are now getting written more and more into the actual application. So we're finding ways that we can pull out that automatically. For JAF admin testing, we have a couple different things. We can look into normal policies. We can look into the parent processes. We have to pay attention to self-service policies because they do run differently than they do from normal policies. And we look at the actual Apple events. So with a normal policy, check-in is triggered via a launch statement. So it's in the background and there's no prompts for the end users. What that means is it might be just failing silently in the background. So things to be aware of there. You might see errors in the policy logs, but not necessarily, depending on how the application exited. You can use the log command to actually dig into it a little bit further. Talking about the parent processes, though, like how do I actually know what's going on? Just because JAF ran it doesn't mean that OS will see JAF as the parent process. Again, I was talking before about terminal and how that looks to be the parent process, depending on how you're triggering these things. Another thing to keep aware of is if you're actually SSHing into a computer and you're calling a policy or calling something that might trigger these things, your end users will see a prompt of SSHD trying to run something on their system. And that can be a little disconcerting to see prompts popping up and telling them that something's happening in their background that they don't know about. And then you as an admin don't actually have the ability to click OK because it's on the end user screen. So be aware of SSH and the ramifications there with it. With Apple events, as I said before, it works as the middleman here. So I see Microsoft Outlook wants to control Skype. Okay? I can either click OK or I can know this ahead of time and whitelist this communication if I am using both of those. Here I see WebEx plugin agent wants to talk to Outlook. Again, likely have to do with calendars and other things and integrations that they're offering there. But it's things to be aware of in your environment. You might not see right away without a little testing. So if we're talking about like Apple events and all the other fun stuff with that, there's some different ways that these are being triggered. So a very common way for admins to interact with end users is to call the different built-in Apple event stuff like, say, Finder, System UI Server, and a few other things. So I'm going to go and look at a script that says, hey, tell application system events, and I'm propping up a prompt to ask them to enter their asset tag. A very common workflow in the past that now has changed. So say I am running this policy via self-service, it's trying, and it's failing, and it's saying, hey, JAF agent wants to talk to system events. So by default, JAF does not whitelist ourselves for those three different main, essentially, user prompt things. And we were told not to whitelist ourselves there right away for that stuff because we shouldn't be granting ourselves access to things that we don't know that we need. This is, if you are an admin leveraging those things, then it's kind of on to you to do that. But we didn't want to make it that hard for you. So we did create a profile. Is this still running? I think I'm paused there. All right. Well, we did build a profile, thankfully, on, again, if you go back to that very verbose knowledge base article, there is a link at the bottom that will bring you to our profile that we actually pre-built that will whitelist JAF for those main different built-in notification tools. As I scroll and scroll and scroll, pre-approval of Apple events. So system events, system UI server, and Finder. And we whitelisted ourselves for JAF binary, JAF app, and the JAF agent. So if I go over to that GitHub, we have a few different things. That's where that code signature gatherer script is. That's where our links are, and I link to the links at the end of this too, so it's a collection of all the links, not meta at all. And I can download this JAF Apple Events mobile config, take this pre-built profile, upload it to the JAF Pro server. As I click around, maybe should have thought of speeding up these videos. And I just go choose to upload that right now. And I will have a profile that will automatically whitelist my communication for JAF to communicate with those different things. So cool, I got that profile now. I can go verify the settings are actually there. Yep, Apple events, cool. I got my code requirement, and then I see Apple events, and then I see, I see System UI Server, and I see all the different things that we're communicating to. So it's pre-populated for all those things. And it's, again, redundant for each, the app, the agent, and the binary, each whitelisted to each of those specific three different things. Cool. All looks good. I set my scope and I push this out to that same smart group I built before, so that way it goes out. I can keep reusing things. Please reuse smart groups. Please make them so they do that stuff. Just for the benefit of your server. Don't go, I hate seeing hundreds and hundreds of smart groups. Like, figure out, make it smaller, maybe use regex for things. Cool, profile's out there. I verify it's there. Now I can hop back to self-service and try that same thing again and see how it works this time. Maybe, hopefully, it comes back to what it was like pre-1014, back in the good old days of less security. All right, so I run it. Boom, I got my asset tag prompt. Cool. So I have my ways to whitelist this to actually make this stuff work, which is awesome. So ways of troubleshooting. Well, application entitlements, and I'll talk a little bit here in a second about how we actually can verify that out. I can watch logs as a post-install script, so I can add an actual script to my policy that would actually tail those logs and report it back into the log. That's a method. Reading the TCC database, or reading the MDM overrides plist. So a little quick distinction. The TCC.db is a database that is contains all of the selections of the end user's prompts, what they said yes and no to. The MDM overrides plist contains all of the settings pushed out via MDM configuration profiles. So they aren't stored in the same area, but if I want to verify that, I can read that. Now, the caveat with both of those is terminal, if I'm going to run those in terminal, terminal needs full disk access to system preferences. So I need access, I need a TCC exception to verify my TCC settings. But if you're an admin running terminal, I think you can click OK and say yes to that, or you can push out a profile. So entitlements, I was talking about apps have to define that now. Well, there's a command, another flag inside the code sign command that I can run and tell it to say, hey, give me the entitlements. So if I run it to an app, it'll actually report out all these different entitlements that are there. Let's say I take a look at Microsoft Outlook. This actually calls out, it's like, hey, it actually needs exceptions to talk to Link, which is interesting. You got Spark, you got Jabber, you got Auto Update, and all these other things. They're actually pre-establishing and writing out in their software what they need access to. So the apps are actually telling you inside themselves what they're going to need access to. So you can actually be a little proactive without having to launch it and knowing, cool, this is going to need to access that. Well, it's not the easiest thing to read. Thankfully, Howard Oakley at eclecticlight.co made a really cool app called, I'm going to go Tassi, I'm not really sure what the pronunciation, T-A-C-C-Y. You point it to an app, and it'll actually automatically check the boxes and know and read out the different entitlements that are there. So we're actually looking at JAF to build this in as well with our utility, but it's not there yet. And he's got a ton of really cool little simple apps that do a bunch of different things. Eclecticlight.co, some nifty stuff, and the blogs he puts out are also pretty awesome. Other things along admin testing, reading the logs. So I can either be live reading, watch what's happening now, or I have a method to look back at previous ones. So say I run this command, I get a very concise, easy to read output of logs. Okay, maybe not. If I break that up and actually look a little bit closer, it is telling me, not in the clearest of terms, but it is telling me what it's trying to do. So RESP, that's the thing's responsible, the thing that's responsible for the request. ACC, it's what is details of the application or script that's attempting to access control. REQ, what is it requesting, the action that's being requested. Carl Ashley has a great blog digging into reading these logs and everything else to understand what it actually means. How do I read the TCC database? Well, there's a couple different ways. It is an SQLite database. And thankfully, again, Carl Ashley made an awesome little script that'll actually just output and display the information super easily. Matthew Warren, also known as Haircut, made a nice little thing to reset, using the TCC util reset things, to reset those end users options. So if you're doing testing and you want to test it, you clicked OK, but you want to put it back to a default state to try again, there's some easy means to actually reset things back so you can have a clean state for that. So reading it using the TCC database read, it shows me nice and easy. Here's the system one. These are the things on my computer that I have said, yes, they have access, all my different applications. And if I'm reading my user settings, these are all the other ones that I've clicked yes to as well. I've had some prompts on my computer. Apparently some of my applications like to have access to things. The TCC database is actually what you see in system preferences as well. So this is a graphical user interface representation of what is in that database. This is a very common misconception and confusion point when people are testing is, hey, I pushed this profile out to my computer to whitelist this stuff, but I don't see it in system preferences. Why not? Well, because those in system preferences are the user choices, not the MDM stuff. Again, all of the MDM stuff that you push via profiles are in the MDM overrides plist. Now I can use plist buddy and I actually can read this out and I can see it. Again, terminal would need access to full disk access to actually read this out. So to kind of show you what that looks like, I run it, print to that file. Let's take a look, see what's my contents. Don't have access. It's because terminal does not have full disk access. Well, it didn't even prompt me to grant it, so I actually have to manually go to system preferences. I go to privacy, unlock. That was JAF 1234 if you couldn't guess. Typed it super fast. I'm all about security. Terminal now has access to accessibility. Cool. Let's try that again. Let's see how it looks and what's my output when I actually read this file. I know it's going to be big, so I awkwardly shrink and expand and do that again. JAF 1234. Boom. Here I can see all the settings pushed down for me on my profiles from JAF. Here's the things that I've whitelisted. Not the most super readable, but it is broken into each section. Here's the things, this is what it's doing, and here's their identifiers. So those are my settings that I've pushed out via that. I have a ton of links of all the information that I've gotten from. Don't worry about trying to take a picture of that. It's very small, it's very hard. All of those links are actually collected here. So jaf.it/TCC will bring you to the list of links. If you do jaf.it PPPC, that will bring you to our knowledge base article. And as I get into these other different sections, each of those are actually shortened with the URL as well. You might be able to guess on the naming conventions I'm using for the other ones as we get to it, but we'll go ahead. So we talked about PPPC, but what about notarization? What does that mean? Well, basically, we've seen notarization for a while. At least in 10.14, we've been seeing different things pop up and say, hey, this can't be open because it's from an unidentified developer. All right, so what's that mean? Well, it means that they didn't upload their stuff to Apple to verify its contents are non-malicious and all this other kind of stuff in there. What's changing that they've said is actually it's going to include macOS apps, non-app bundles such as kernel extensions, disk images, which is interesting, and then flat installer packages. So all of these things would have to be notarized. Basically, you upload it to Apple, they verify its contents. Thankfully, there's built-in things in the Xcode to actually add that part of your build process to have things automatically being notarized. There's some binary utilities and other stuff all built in there. So talk to your developers, figure it out. There's methods to just make this be an automated part of your build. So cool. How do I actually check notarization? Well, there's a nifty binary called SPCTL. If I do -A-V and point it to an application, it will either give me accepted, which means it's been notarized, or it'll give me different responses of why it's not. I can make it more verbose, adding more V's, and get more information, actually figure out the developer ID, and I can figure out more specifically who built this or who maybe didn't sign this. If it didn't come back, it could give me different things, like maybe unknown format and import, or rejected. It's obsolete. The version signature is too old. So all these different things, there's a lot of things out there, and it's hard to know what is not actually notarized in your environment, since if they already clicked OK, they might not see it. But again, as Apple stated, coming forward soon, it's new applications and updated applications. So even the ones that might work right away, if they're updated later and they're not notarized, your end users could still get these prompts. I'm a poor scripter, but through the method of stealing a bunch of things from other people's work, I have a little script that will actually, you can push out, just either run in terminal, and it'll give you the output of all of your unnotarized apps. Again, I have a link to get this. It's up on GitHub. Or I can run it via policy, and it'll actually report back in my policy logs of, I just point at a machine and say, give me all of your unnotarized apps. So it'll run through and just tell me either approved or not. Not the easiest to read, but it's giving me the output all broken out. It's each space is breaking up a different application and giving you the status of what is not notarized. So again, I'd pick a computer that has all of your applications, run this policy on it, and report back what is not notarized so you know going forward what might be trouble. I have a short IT link. It's notarized-status. And just because I like you guys, I also translated it as well. So either one will work. It will bring you to the link to that script. Try not to judge me too hard on that script. As with all scripts and anything, actually, especially that I'm handing out, not supported. This is as is. Tweak it and do what you want with it. I can try to update things later, but just trying to make it a little bit easier right now till other things come along. So cool, notarization, all that fun stuff. It's coming out. It's happening. Be aware. Be ready. We've had the fun time with Kext for a while. Thankfully, a few different people have wrote about this. The Kext Apocalypse, Richard Frampton, Purvis, also goes by Frampton, has a great blog that actually runs through what the ramifications are and ways to report on this as well. So he's got a script that will actually run through and list this out. So if I run the script, which again he has on that blog, and that link actually brings you to the JAF Nation discussion, which links to the blog. But the JAF Nation discussion is good and it has other input, and as things move along, I think that discussion will probably pick back up pretty soon with the new changes coming. So it displays the values. Now, beyond displaying the values of the different things needed for whitelisting the text, it actually also creates a plist that it drops onto your desktop that you can just take and upload to JAF Pro to whitelist those kernel extensions. Again, in the future, in macOS 10.15, it is moving to system extensions, so some of these things are going to have to be updated and deal with that, but it is pretty slick as is to be able to just do a whitelist for all. Other things, I figured I'd just throw it in here too, 32-bit apps. If you still have 32-bit apps in your environment, either get rid of them or talk to developers to get things updated. This is me running this is Der Flounder, so Rich Troughton, his script for gathering 32-bit apps, and the link there brings it to Mr. Troughton's Der Flounder website, blog post on how to do this, and it has the script there for you as well. This is me running on my machine right now. You can see I still have some old versions of JAF Pro that was that's 10.0, so they were 32-bit, and I see a few other ones that were just kind of weird, and the only other one is Iceberg, apparently still 32-bit as well. So basically with all of these things, whether it's TCC, notarization, Kext, 32-bit, what it really means is start having more conversations with your developers or the vendors that you have out there. It is up to those vendors to actually update their apps to work on these modern things. I'm not going to tell you to stop using those different things. There are methods to whitelist and approve and get things going, but the way things are going, these developers need to get with the modern frameworks and update their stuff. Otherwise, they're not going to work well for their end users going forward. So it really is either you can do a lot of work or start talking to those developers to get them to update their methods. Again, here is all the 3 links that kind of collect all the different stuff. TCC, Kext, 32-bit, and translated notarized status. So I was quickly running through all of that different stuff just to make sure we had some time for question and answers. Is there any questions? No? Okay, great.